Now we jump in to our first news video of the day, and it is that, well, we got some news here and there about WrestleMania, and also we got some random news, random little nuggets that we can slip in there, as we also talk about stuff outside of WrestleMania, including QTV and the debut of QTV, which took place last night on Rampage, where QT Marshall basically explained the, I guess, the path of events that took us to QT joining up with Powerhouse Hobbs, and as it was said on QTV, the downfall of Wardlow. For those who may not remember, Wardlow had his car broken into when they were in San Francisco, and I mean, a lot of us thought it was something legit. We thought it was something legit. We thought a fan or somebody in San Francisco, with the reputation of that San Francisco has of not being the safest area, we thought that it was something that just happens. We thought it was just something that happens, and it was something that unfortunately took place because of outside circumstances. But as it turns out, QT Marshall and that explained on QTV that it was actually Aaron Solo, former Factory member Aaron Solo, who broke into Wardlow's car and stole his gear, stole the TBS championship. I don't know how it is, how do you put it, justifiable to explain on national television that you basically committed a crime to a degree and are willingly admitted it. Just think about that for a second. But at the same time, it does explain partially the status of the Factory with Powerhouse Hobbs, and also it explains QT Marshall and the appeal that that QT Marshall has to Powerhouse Hobbs. The one thing that I think AEW needs to avoid, though, is the idea of having Powerhouse Hobbs be another member of a faction, even if he takes the Brian Cage in the original Team Taz. It was Brian Cage, Ricky Starks, and Powerhouse Hobbs. Powerhouse Hobbs was the muscle, and Brian Cage was the top star. Brian Cage was the guy that challenged for the world title. Brian Cage was the guy. Even if Powerhouse Hobbs is that guy with QT Marshall, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is he needs to be on his own. So he could be with QT Marshall, but he needs to be on his own. Because it won't work him being in another faction after what happened with him and Ricky Starks and the breakup of Team Taz. Powerhouse Hobbs still needs to be alone. So it's understandable that QT Marshall wants to help. It's understandable that QT Marshall wants to show why he is a valued asset to Powerhouse Hobbs. But the fact of the matter is, he also needs to understand, like AEW needs to understand, that Powerhouse Hobbs can't just be a part of another faction again, because he just ended his status with Team Taz last year with Ricky Starks. He can't just go back and do it again with QT Marshall. It won't work, in my opinion. Speaking of Brian Cage, though, we do have an update on Brian Cage's contract. This coming from Fightful, as a lot has been made over the past couple of months with Brian Cage's contract. About Brian Cage's contract, and this is from Fightful Select. Fightful Select has been told that WWE has maintained interest in Brian Cage in the event that he becomes a free agent and are open to having conversations with the Ring of Honor six-man tag team champion. That period won't have to wait long, as we are told his contract runs through the end of March, specifically the Supercard of Honor pay-per-view, which, as I've mentioned in the past, the few days before WrestleMania, we have the joint show with New Japan and Impact Wrestling on that Thursday, Supercard of Honor on the Friday alongside Rampage, and then we have WrestleMania on Saturday and Sunday. So it's going to be a busy 4 days for wrestling news broadcaster or wrestling content creators. It's going to be a busy few days for us in that window. But also, Brian Cage, that does mean very likely that Brian Cage will be defending the Ring of Honor tag team six-man tag team titles with his fellow Embassy members. On the Supercard of Honor. The Fightful article goes on to say, originally Brian Cage's contract with AEW was set to expire in late January, mid-February, but Brian Cage has had some heavy hitters within AEW in his corner as of late, specifically Chris Jericho, who spoke publicly saying that he hopes Brian Cage remains with AEW. According to Fightful again, Brian Cage hasn't closed the door on potentially re-signing with AEW, but haven't heard where things stand with AEW. And Brian Cage does have several connections within WWE. The one point I would make is, and I think this is something that everyone would agree with, that Brian Cage would do very well with WWE if AEW would let him go. Brian Cage is somebody that has a tremendous amount of potential, and that if AEW had, I think he has been one of the many people that have suffered in AEW over the last couple of years with a lack of direction and a lack of understanding the big picture within the company. By that I mean that, Moxley being the champion, for example, gave the company some stability in a time where they lacked stability, where they needed stability. And Moxley, a proven name. Outside of MJF, and MJF has proven himself over the last couple of years, since the start of AEW, as somebody that AEW could viably invest in. But in my opinion, just think about it like this. How many times has AEW invested in someone? How many times has AEW invested in someone that is not a previously established name that you could potentially build a company around? Chris Jericho, Jon Moxley, CM Punk. I mean, look at Hangman Page. I know Hangman Page was world champion, but look at his title reign. Look at his title reign and tell me, compare that to the other title reigns and say that Hangman Page is on the same level. Oh, maybe he's on the same level as CM Punk because of how bad Punk's reign was, because of how unhealthy Punk was during his reign. But the fact of the matter is, Hangman Page was not on the level, and the title did not bring him to the level of Moxley or Jericho or MJF. And his feud right now with Moxley, without the world title, is doing more to elevate Hangman Page than the world title did when he was world champion and defeating Kenny Omega. That's my point. That AEW needs to do that, and it just seems like they have skepticism of giving a title reign to an unproven commodity and a viable title reign to an unproven commodity because it won't bring tickets in. It won't because everybody doesn't know that person's name. Everybody doesn't know Brian Cage. And I'm not saying Brian Cage deserves to be world champion. I'm saying Brian Cage could have been TNT champion. I'm saying Brian Cage could have had a short run with the world title. I'm saying they could have given Brian Cage more stability and given him more. But now the question is, would WWE give him that more, or would WWE be just like AEW and not give him enough? I guess the only way to find out is finding out if Brian Cage does leave for WWE, That's the one way we would find out what WWE has for Brian Cage that AEW didn't want to give. But either way, I will see you. We have more news to get to and a recap of SmackDown, so we got a little bit more to get to, and I will see you in the next video.